Greetings, everyone. StephenGray here again. You are, I'm sure you are aware, either watching this on the Stephen Gray Vision YouTube channel, or you are listening to it on anchor.fm. That's anchor.fm, and the spin-offs that goes to, like Spotify, iTunes, and a couple of other sources. This is, I'm not keeping an exact count. I think this is episode 14. I haven't been numbering them exactly. So there are something like 13 previous interviews with leading figures in the psychedelic world, so to speak, such as Wade Davis, Paul Stamets, Dennis McKenna, Francoise Bourzat, and a number of others. So I hope you'll check out some of those. And the purpose of these, the mission, you might say, is to help people, help humanity come to terms with the fact that we are not on a sustainable trajectory. And that's putting it mildly. And there's a very good chance that that is coming to a somewhat fiery end in the relatively near future. And there's a great need for a consciousness transformation spreading around as far as it can go. That is the essential purpose of these, of this series of interviews. And I would say for anyone who cares, the work altogether. So on that note, I'm very pleased to be interviewing a young man that I think is doing some excellent work related to, no, I was going to say psychedelic mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms, but not just the psilocybin ones by any stretch. And that other kind of work I'm going to be asking Alex Dorr about. But I'm first going to read a short bio, which if you've been watching these interviews, you know I like to do at the beginning. So here goes. Alex Dorr is the founder, president, and CEO of Mushroom Revival Incorporated. He resides in Austin, Texas with his loving partner. I meant to ask you, Alex, how to pronounce that, so I'll just take a shot at it. Lyra Nymackle, but you can correct me.
Niemako.
Nymackle, okay, cool. Is it Lyra?
It's Lyra, yeah.
Okay, cool. Who co-hosts the Mushroom Revival podcast with them. After healing his depression, anxiety, and Lyme disease with mushroom, Alex got his degree in mycology and is the author of the book Mycoremediation Handbook, a grassroots guide to growing mushrooms and cleaning up toxic waste with fungi, or fungi. Paul Stamets says there is no accurate pronunciation for that word. That book came out in 2017. He led the growth of the largest and first certified organic Cordyceps militaris mushroom farm in the Americas. Alex is an international educator and researcher on mycology, teaching and conducting research all around the world in places such as China, Peru, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Mexico, Canada, Jamaica, Vietnam, and more. Alex is absolutely obsessed with the healing power of mushrooms and has signed his life away to the bidding of the mushrooms. Nice way of putting it, Alex. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to let mushrooms have the mic and let them speak through me as you know, I always joke I'm a mushroom, and there's so much wisdom that they have to offer humanity and beyond. And it's an honor to be on a show to dive in and hopefully inspire other people to be as passionate as I am, and I'm sure you are, about mushrooms.
Yes, and if not necessarily as passionate about them to the degree and to the spread, so to speak, or breadth that you are, the depth and breadth, certainly to the purpose, a good part of this, at least our specific conversation today, is to help educate people on the fact that most of us, it's, you know, we barely know anything about what fungi in general, as well as psilocybin mushrooms in particular, can do. And I watched much of and skimmed through a bunch of this YouTube video that you did, this 3 hour long YouTube video. What's it called again?
If you type my name on YouTube, you can find a few,
Oh,
and
okay.
you know, various different classes that I've taught in the past about mushrooms, and I'm sure I'll touch upon a lot of the same topics. But you know,
Cool.
and 3 hours is kind of a short amount of time to even scratch the surface of what fungi can offer this world, and we as a species have barely even scratched the surface. All the
Absolutely.
top researchers all around the world, if they were to link minds and share all the information, we would know a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what there is
Oh
to know
yeah.
about fungi. And that's for everything, the whole universe. And we're just consciousness being conscious of consciousness itself and this inevitable exploration of the universe. And it's humbling to realize that we really don't know anything. And it's exciting to research such a field as mycology or the study of mushrooms or fungi, because I feel like out of most fields, they are maybe more underdeveloped. If you relate it to plants, we know a lot about plants, and most people know how to take care of a house plant or they have a garden in their backyard. But when it comes to mushrooms, people usually in the United States and Canada, and you know, if you're not in China or Eastern Europe, you'll probably think of mushrooms as the slimy mushrooms on your pizza, or the ones that'll kill you, or ones that'll make you trip out like in Alice in Wonderland. And so this knowledge of what mushrooms are or what fungi are
Hmm.
is lacking, and it's almost like tapping into this secret knowledge that has been here for millions and millions, over 1 billion years. And that's an honor to be in these human bodies and explore that.
Yeah, well, I want to come back later in our conversation to some of the things that mushrooms can do, other than the obvious edible, and to some degree are getting better known. Some of the, ones like lion's mane, turkey tail, reiki, and chaga are getting known, but there's a lot more that mushrooms can do. And also, I think we've both read Merlin Sheldrake's book, Entangled Life, which, if, I would say for 95% of the population at least, that would be a real eye opener, because the relationship of fungi or fungi to everything, and the fact that they are everywhere, they're ubiquitous, they're underfoot all the time, and they're absolutely central to just physical existence on this planet whatsoever. But let's save that for a little bit because I want to start with some of your history. But even before that, I just wanted with something that just occurred to me at the moment. Have you ever read, and I'm asking you this for a particular reason, did you ever come upon it's not listed by their names, it's Terence and Dennis McKenna's Magic Mushroom Growers Guide that they wrote under the names Oss and Oric back in the 70s?
Yeah, that was great. Great little beginning guide.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the information is pretty outdated, but I think it was pretty radical at the time to release that, and I think was the seed or the spore which inoculated a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people to begin home cultivating.
Yeah.
And to be able to have this medicine in their own hands, I think was super revolutionary. And it's interesting because if you relate this plant medicine or fungal medicine to most other plant medicines out there, it's one that I feel like is pretty universal. Everywhere in the world, if you look, there's
Mm-hmm.
probably a rich history, thousands of years old, of people using mushrooms. And so other things like peyote, there's, it's only a subregion. There's specific practices, specific peoples that, have specific traditions and ceremonies involved. With mushrooms, it's pretty universal. And so for that, it's kind of a medicine for the people, for humans. And
Mm-hmm.
to give that information to everyone on how they can personally develop a deep relationship with, and it goes beyond psychedelics, like what Merlin Sheldrake's doing with his book Entangled Life, and many other kind of huge fungal influencers. It's extraordinary to bridge that gap
Mm-hmm.
between this breadth of knowledge and the average person out there.
Yeah. I brought up the McKenna's book for a reason, because I want to ask you if you remember something that was in it. But I agree with what you just said. Absolutely, I think we're on the cusp of an explosion of understanding of mushrooms. And don't let's go off in this direction yet, please. But just want to say that. Ayahuasca has been leading the way, so to speak, in terms of its popular recognition and so on. But I won't be surprised at all if mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms, if we're talking about visionary healing medicine in that regard, leaps ahead, so to speak. Not that it's a competition, but within the next 10 to 20 years, because of what you're saying, because they're ubiquitous, they're a lot easier to produce than the at least two plants required for ayahuasca, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, coming back to the McKenna's brothers book, there was a lovely, I don't know if you remember this or even paid attention to it, but at the very beginning of the book, there's like a little page and a half, 2-page thing that says something like, I'm the voice of the mushroom. I'm older than old, and so on like that. And the reason I mention it in this context is it says, I'd like to offer you a deal. This I haven't read this for a long time. This is just my kind of summary of what I remember. Not exact details, but basically it said, I'd like to strike up a deal with you, a kind of a bargain or a contract. I can show you some things that would amaze you, and in return, since I don't have a body like yours on a planet like yours, I get to look out through your eyes. So, the implication being that there's a wonderful relationship awaiting us in that regard, which also can benefit the mushroom spirit, if you want to call it that. But coming back to where I'd like to go with this, if you're okay with this, is and well, you are. We've already talked about that. I think a good starting point for the rest of our conversation would be how you got, as you say yourself, obsessed with mushrooms. You've mentioned to me, and it's briefly referenced in that bio that I read, that you were having some struggles as a kid. And rather than me say anything more about that, why don't you tell people what that was all about?
Sure. And I want to thank the McKennas as well. They were a big part of that journey. But yeah, I'd say a pretty great childhood on the outside, and loving parents, everything checked the boxes. But for whatever reason, I had a deep spell of depression that started when I was, I don't know, around 14 or so, and could never really figure out why. On the external, everything was great, but with just these deep spells of clinical depression, and during certain points was suicidal, and used various drugs such as alcohol or weed to suppress that and escape from those feelings. And it wasn't until orientation week of college where someone offered me a full solo cup worth of dried psilocybin mushrooms. And at that point, I hadn't taken them. I've heard of them, but I wasn't really familiar of what a dose was, or had no personal experience with magic mushrooms up to that point. And thinking he was gonna, sell them to me, I said, "Well, how much for the cup worth?" And he said, "Oh, well, I'll give you the whole solo cup if you eat it on the spot."
Do you have any
And
idea what, in retrospect, what the dried weight of that would have been roughly?
I feel like it was over 14 grams at
Whoa.
that point. It was a major heroic dose, and it was definitely way more than someone should take on their first time. And that, some people have a very gentle meet and greet with the spirit of mushrooms. My first time, it was a flying kick to break down the door, and the whole journey was incredible. I felt amazing, and it was the first time that I had this deep feeling that I got it. And I felt happy for the first time, deep core happiness for the first time in many years.
Hmm.
And everything just made sense. And it wasn't something that I could articulate, although I tried. It just, every atom of my body felt at home
It
and
sounds like you
felt,
were able to surrender to such a huge dose in a way that perhaps a lot of people might not be able to.
yeah. And I think, you know, during some experiences where I felt suicidal, there was points where I came to the realization, well, if I'm this close to death, I might as well be open to life. It's an
Hmm.
interesting phenomenon that happens where maybe you have a near death experience. And so everything after a near death experience is that much more sacred and that much more juicy, so to speak.
Hmm.
And, if I was like, well, I could be dead right now. And so why not be open to this? And what am I so scared of?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
some
that
might say
makes me.
that's
Oh, sorry.
some might say that's a little reckless, but it was an incredible journey. Complete ego death. Was no concept of me still there. No body was seeing or experiencing the life and death of the universe before my eyes every couple seconds, and was yeah one with the universe. A little Satari moment, and from that moment, it had this kind of earmark in my consciousness of, wow, mushrooms are incredible. After that night, I was on some pharmaceutical drugs for depression, anxiety. I flushed them down the toilet, never looked back. I got into yoga and meditation and healthy eating. I still had, a few months I had to work out a lot of the bad habits and get off drinking and uh, change my relationship to tobacco. And I bought every single mushroom book that I could. And I went out into the woods every day to try to ID mushrooms. And I foraged so many that they would rot before I can ID them all on the table. And took every class, every internship, and did this interesting study where I grew oyster mushrooms on cigarette butts as this symbology of me being able to end my addiction with tobacco through mushrooms, and then using mushrooms to degrade the toxins of the cigarette butts. And so it was this full circle metamorphosis. And they just had me hooked. And it wasn't until, I was studying all these different things at the same time, but that was pretty paramount. It wasn't until I got Lyme disease where I was bedridden. Had painful joints, had brain fog. I was feeling absolutely like trash, and I tried everything. I tried doxycycline. I tried, the typical pharmaceutical route to treat Lyme disease, and it wasn't until I used psilocybin mushrooms to get at the root of what is a parasite and how can I help myself on a spiritual and psychological level to heal Lyme as almost like an initiation process from the universe, as this is an initiation where we're going to give you an illness and it's up to you to self-cure yourself, and that is the medicine. uh, and using different functional mushrooms like you just talked about, like reishi and cordyceps and chaga and things like that, where I totally saw a 180 with my health. I got my life back. That's what spurred me to get my degree in mycology from school. I wrote the microremediation book using mushrooms to clean up toxic waste. And from there, it was history. I signed my life away to mushrooms and fungi and never looked back.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful work as far as I can tell. As I said, I did watch a good portion of that video, and I want to that YouTube video that I mentioned, and I want to ask you a little bit more about some of the other things that mushrooms can do. But before we get into that, because that could take up quite a bit of our conversation, I just want to ask you if before we leave the psilocybin ones more or less for this conversation, just want to ask you two more things about them. One is. How do you, if you do, how do you see them informing your spiritual growth now? Like, do you have an ongoing relationship with the psilocybin mushrooms? And what are they teaching you now, if that's the case?
It's an interesting relationship where I've done them so many times that I'm less of an exploratory relationship with them and more of a tune-up relationship.
Mm,
And so my beginning journeys were just exploring the space and really understanding what mushrooms are. That will never go away. I'll never understand what mushrooms are, that the mushroom space. That's a continual journey. But I almost know before I eat mushrooms what they'll teach me, so to speak. And for me, it really was the nail on the coffin, so to speak, or the straw on the camel's back, or whatever metaphor you want to use, where I was, setting up a ceremony. I was talking with the spirit of the mushrooms, and I was setting my intentions of what I wanted to bring in my life, what I wanted to let go of, and different things that I wanted to work on in the space. And the spirit of the mushrooms was like, all right, do this, do this, do this, let go of that, talk to this person, XYZ. It's like, oh, wow, great. And, I ate the mushrooms and was like, wow, this is going to be a great, really productive journey. And silence for hours. And I didn't quote unquote feel anything. And I check back in with, the spirit of the mushrooms. I'm like, hey, I'm not really feeling anything. I thought we were gonna have a, productive session, and they're like, oh, we already did it. Even before you ate the mushrooms, I already gave you a to-do list. Like, go out in the world and do it. If uh, one word that I learned in the ayahuasca community is called fireworks. And I'm sure a lot of different people in the psychedelic community call this fireworks, but it's like the visuals and the psychedelic experience, so to speak. A lot of people are searching for the fireworks. They want to see flashy lights and color distortion and all these cool, trippy things. And it's almost distractions from the real journey.
right
And
on.
that was huge for me, of them just telling me, like, look, psilocybin or magic mushrooms is just a tool, but you can tune into us whenever you want, and the medicine is always there. Psilocybin, the molecule, will work on your brain and help. And I almost use it as a microdose now to just kind of keep my system in check and have a slight, perceptive, different angle on the world, and help my mood and things like that. And every once in a while, I'll have a check in, a bigger dose if I've been working a lot and not checking into myself, not in my meditation yoga routine. I'm not looking at certain things in my life that I should be looking at, or certain traumas will come up, and you're like, oh, this needs a little more work. And so I'll have a bigger dose and have a full-on ceremony. But and this is true for everyone. You can talk to plants, you can talk to mushrooms, and the magic is beyond the magic mushrooms. All mushrooms are magic, and you can tune in and get a lot of great insight about your life and the universe from any mushroom and anything, even if it's inanimate. The world, you know, uh, we are the universe, and everything is just a reflection of ourselves, that we can learn from. Everything is a teacher. So I wouldn't just limit your medicine journey to just quote unquote plant medicines or fungal medicines. I think there's a huge world of medicine of everything in the universe.
Yeah, that's great. No, really well put, Alex. I really appreciate hearing that. And there's a couple of points that you've said there that really stuck out for me that I think are important for a lot of people. And one is that it's not about the light show or whatever. I I work with cannabis a lot, and I lead cannabis ceremonies, and I've written about it and so on with my book Cannabis and Spirituality. And lately, I've been getting the message from the spirit of the plant is that there's no there there. Ideally, when you understand cannabis properly as a spiritual ally, it's just entering you a little deeper into reality. It's not taking you off on some sidetrack, right? And ultimately, yeah, it's just as you've put so nicely, I think we already we already are, as the Buddhists would say, we are all Buddha. We're all awake. The word Buddha just means awake or one who is awakened, right? So that was really good. I appreciate that. And also the other thing that I think is really important that most of us don't really understand that you alluded to is that once you've established a really strong relationship with a fungus like psilocybin or some other similar medicines, the medicine, the spirit of that plant is with you, right? You don't have to necessarily be taking it to have that connection, right?
Right. And
Yeah.
also true with cultivation, is every step of the journey. If you are to grow your own for consumption,
Mm-hmm.
that whole ceremony starts the second you receive the spores,
Nice.
and then you germinate the spores, the mycelium grows, put it into a container to grow. It's growing, you're taking care of the mushrooms, you dry them or eat them fresh. Afterwards, the integration process, these are all super valuable points of the process that I think maybe doesn't get as much recognition, and most people want to look at the fireworks or the light show, and that's it. And then the next day they'll hop on a plane or go to New York City or whatever, and forget the whole integration process or the set and setting leading up to it. It's all part of the journey, and all part of our great awakening to realize we're already awake, we're already here.
Yeah. That's really important too. I'm really glad you said that as well because I mean, we don't want to get too sidetracked on that general theme. I think, but it's really important for people to recognize that we of the so-called first world, if you want to call it that, and especially if you have enough money to get by, you're not worried about putting food on the table every single day of your life, like so many are. We are. In a sense, being entertained to death, and we've treated the world as a source, as a candy store in a way, and that's another whole problem in itself. But people are used to things being commodities for them, and things that they can pick up like a candy bar at the store, and just consume. A consuming a society, and as you say, it's a totally different. The sane, healthy, and sustainable relationship with these medicines, with life altogether, it is a relationship. It's an ongoing relationship. There's an institute called Chacruna Institute in California, which is really pushing the whole reciprocity idea toward the medicines, toward the places where they grow, toward the people whose traditions they come from, and all that. So really appreciate your addressing that one. You probably have something to say about that, but and you can if you want. But I also want to ask you. This has been great to hear these points on psilocybin. Oh, actually, what? Let's do one more on psilocybin.
Sure.
Before we get into, I want to ask you about the work that you're doing with Mushroom Revival Incorporated and so on. But we alluded to this in our sort of pre-conversation that we had a few days ago, and I asked you if you had any thoughts about what if there is the best or the better ways that psilocybin mushroom in particular could take this rightful place that I envision and we envision that within 10, 20 years they will have. But, what are the best ways that they could enter further into a more accepted legal use for a variety of purposes? Are there concerns about wrong tracks? Are there good ways to go, etc.?
Yeah, let me give a brief history of psilocybin as a whole to kind of give context to what I am going to say, because for most people, they don't understand what magic mushrooms are or what psilocybin containing mushrooms are as a whole. And so to really understand that, we have to go back in time, 3.5 billion years ago, where we see cyanobacteria arriving on land. About 2.5 billion years after that, we get the first record of fungi ever found. And I'm sure we'll find fungi that are much older. That's just the most recent, oldest discovery. 700 million years ago, we get lichen, and that was the first symbiotic land organism between cyanobacteria and a few types of fungi. They develop into early plants and mycorrhizal fungi, which are fungi connecting to roots of early plants. Then, at 420 million years ago, we get arthropods or insects digging into the soil and starting to eat those plant roots and that mycelium connecting the plants. Psilocybin, the theory goes that it evolved as a defense mechanism against these arthropods or these insects eating these roots or this mycelium. And so these fungi, when they broke away from plants and started creating their own fruiting bodies, as we call mushrooms today, some of them contained psilocybin or psilocybin in the mycelial networks, the roots of the mushrooms themselves. And they were used as a deterrent for insects for many, many hundreds of millions of years, way before humans ever came on the planet or mammals. And they were used as a mechanism to control the behavior of insects. So when trees started growing and they fell down, there's no organism that can break down lignin, one of the hardiest chemical structures on the planet. Fungi, it took a little bit, but they figured out how to degrade lignin. But other compounds such as cellulose, hemicellulose, other insects like to burrow in trees and like to burrow in organic matter and eat that woody material. Fungi was trying to use psilocybin as chemical warfare against these insects. And so there's this phenomenon that happens in a lot of communities. I hear of people thinking, well, nature made magic mushrooms for humans. And, there's this theory by Terence and Denham McKenna of the stoned ape theory.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And that's true in a theory. I'm not debunking it, but there's a really fascinating history that I don't think is told a lot, whereas the beginning of why there were psilocybin mushrooms to begin with. And it was really our early humanoid ancestors evolving to be able to consume psilocybin. And when we left Ethiopia and we're moving further north, there was less sunlight, less serotonin, and psilocybin works on the serotonin system and helps, it's almost like a happy drug. And for us as early humanoids, this is huge to bring into colder climates and to store in honey and to work with psilocybin containing mushrooms as we travel to places with less sunlight and harsher environments where it might be harsher on our own, mental, emotional states and our serotonin levels. So we actually evolved to be able to ingest psilocybin, and the chemical keys work perfectly inside of our brains. And that isn't an evolution of fungi to match us, it's our evolution to match fungi. And we
Interesting.
share over 50% of our DNA with fungi, and they're our old ancestor, so there are old family members that we said, so to speak, hey, if we're going to evolve further, we need to evolve ourselves to match with psilocybin mushrooms and other things as well. And so that's the theory of, stoned ape theory. Our early ancestors, hunters and gatherers, ate magic mushrooms. The effects of neurogenesis helped us evolve as a species. And we see cave paintings for thousands and thousands of years. The oldest recorded human with spores in her teeth, the Red Lady of El Moran, in 17,000 BC, was found with spores of mushrooms in her teeth. And so we have a deep history with mushrooms all across the globe. And it went from cave paintings to starting to document it in books a couple thousand years ago in China, in traditional Chinese medicine. And then from, 1900s until now, we're starting to isolate compounds and use them into drugs. And in 2017, the top 10 fungal-derived pharmaceuticals, they were bringing in $30 billion in 2017, just 10 fungal-derived medicines. Penicillin is one of them, saving hundreds of millions of people's lives. And so that context, it brings a different awareness of what psilocybin is and what our relationship with this mushroom is. And, there's a lot of people in this space that I've seen with they cashed out in the cannabis business and they're looking to cash big in the psilocybin space. And I can see how people can have a hard time with that. I think out of anything to really capitalize on, I think it can maybe have the biggest amount of benefit for the biggest amount of people. If you're going to mass produce something, I can see the spirit of psilocybin kind of laughing at it and be like, well, we're getting into more people and changing this mass consciousness, and so be it. I think regardless of how we structure it, I don't agree with making it illegal for people to cultivate their own or ingest their own. I do think there needs to be some structure for people that, have end-of-life care, that are dealing with OCD or addiction, that they can go to a clinic and they can have a session with a trained professional and who are really trained with set and setting and any adverse reactions and really bring people through this journey. I think that's really important to set up and also have it decriminalized so anyone can do whatever they want with nature as long as they're not jeopardizing themselves and other people. But yeah, we're starting to see it. And surprisingly, there's a lot of places in the world where it is fully legal. The Bahamas, Brazil, Jamaica, Nepal, Samoa are 100% legal for psilocybin mushrooms. There's other places like the Netherlands where it's only legal as a truffle. And that kind of skirts the laws a little bit. And there's other places where the laws are a little finicky. British Virgin Islands, it's legal to cultivate and possess, but you can't sell. And other places like you're in Canada, you can buy and sell grow kits, but you can't actually grow them.
Yeah.
And other places like spores, the spores of mushrooms are legal to
Hmm.
sell, but the second you germinate them, it's illegal. South Africa has the same thing. You can buy and sell grow kits. And, Iceland, it's only illegal when you dry it. But if it's fresh, then it's totally legal. And, there's tons of places that just don't have any regulation whatsoever. And then other places, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, they're technically illegal, but they just don't enforce it. And similar in Mexico, it's technically illegal, but there's some wiggle room for indigenous use. And in the US, we've actually gotten a lot of different states and cities decriminalized. Oakland, Ann Arbor, Denver, Santa Cruz, Washington, D.C. are all decriminalized right now as of December 22nd, 2020. And then Oregon just passed for medical purposes. And, I am a little worried of people patenting certain
Hmm.
processes and or for certain compounds, just like we saw with cannabis, big pharmaceutical companies making drugs with them and not allowing people to have access. And
Yeah.
so as long as there is decriminalization, and the average Joe, especially marginalized communities, people of color, and people with strong you know, ancestral use of mushrooms, to be able to use that in ceremony is huge. And to be able to access it cheaply is huge, because ayahuasca, you know, it can be expensive for people to, say, fly to Peru and pay for a whole ceremony, or if it's in the US, to pay for, a ceremony. And then these plants, if they're not, they take so long to grow, and they can be endangered if overused. Same with peyote. They take forever to grow, and they're endangered. And with mushrooms, you can grow an extraordinary amount for super, super cheap. And so to have that in the hands of the average person is huge. And then also to have clinical settings for people who, they don't feel comfortable doing it in their own home, or they don't have someone to trip sit with them, and they feel safe in a clinical setting with a trained psychologist, or someone to help them through whatever trauma or whatever they're dealing with. And so I think a mix of both. And I don't have the magic answer of what that would look like. I'm sure we'll figure it out as we go along, as we see with cannabis. Some things work and some others don't, and so we can get better as we go.
Yeah, good points. No, well put. I've asked the right person that question. You've certainly been paying attention to what's going on around the world with these mushrooms. That's wonderful. Yeah, and I think it's important for those of us impatient, like I sometimes get myself. I just get fed up. Like, oh, come on, folks, no brainer. We have good medicines here. They do great work. Let's just get on with it, please. That's the idealistic part of my brain. But I was interviewing Dr. Julie Holland recently, who has a new book called Good Chemistry. What is it? The science of I forget what it is, from soul to psychedelics or something like that. Science of connection from soul to psychedelics, and we were talking about that issue, and she said, yeah, it's important for people to realize that with cannabis, for example, and some of the other medicines as well, that it's a phase. They're newly becoming destigmatized and legally sanctioned, and so on and so on. So it's going to get better, and so that was an excellent answer. Kind of open-ended, but clear as well. So thanks for that. And before we get too far gone here and feel like we need to round it up at some point, I definitely want to know about the work you've been doing with Mushroom Revival Inc. Because when I watched that video, as I say, I skimmed some of it, but I usually just kind of skipped ahead 3 or 4 minutes to see if it was still talking about the same subject, so I could get an overview of the different kinds of things. And I was really impressed with the different kinds of uses that, that you and others are finding for mushrooms. Now we're getting away from the psilocybin mushrooms, but like replacements for leather. I mean, if I could get my hands on some fungal bacon. My wife loves bacon. It's part of her family history. They're European. They like sausages and fatty meats and all that kind of stuff, and she loves bacon. But if I could get her to tune into something that's as tasty and similar in taste, then it's made from a mushroom and not from a pig in a farm, then that would be wonderful. So could you go through some of the really potentially revolutionary uses that mushrooms can be put to, in the years ahead?
Let's start with mushroom bacon. There's this company, our friends at Ecovative made a company called At Last Food, and they made, I think their first product was a mushroom bacon. And the faux meat industry, I've been vegetarian, vegan on and off for most of my life. I view meat as a supplement, and if I'm looking to get that heme iron or other supplements, I'll eat meat every once in a while, but definitely not part of my normal diet. And so, to help, a lot of faux meat is made out of soy, and it's not that much better for the environment. We see, I was firsthand seeing it in Ecuador, just thousands and thousands of acres of rainforest, the most biodiverse places in the world, being clear cutted for cow and soy. And I like tofu, and soy is great, as and tempeh I think is cool when it's done on a small scale. But on a mass scale, the way we're doing it, with a lot of chemicals and clear cutting biodiverse rainforests, is not the most ideal. And so these replacements for faux meat is revolutionary. And they're also doing something, they're making structures for cell-based meat. And this creates the exact texture with all the micro caverns and dips and gullies and custom shapes of what a typical big cut of meat would feel like and taste like, the texture and everything. Right now it's a lot of ground meat, and so that is really pushing the limit of our reliance on actual animals, and kind of flipping the script on that. So that's number one. I think just eating more mushrooms in general, they're filled with so many amazing nutrients, one of them being vitamin D3. And for, people with not a lot of melanin and living in higher elevation climates where there's not a lot of sun, a lot of people have a lack of vitamin D, and it's huge for our mental health. And, I was just living in Massachusetts. I moved to Austin, Texas, where there's a lot more sun, but I was using a happy lamp, trying to get more artificial sunlight. And I thought it was the funniest thing ever. I'm having to artificially stimulate this sunlight. There's so many people living in offices on their computer screen all day, not getting the vital nutrients from nature, from the sun. And so there's some mushrooms like shiitake and even button mushrooms that you get from the store. They can shine UV light or just leave them outside. It can increase the vitamin D content by 50,000 times. And so this is huge, and is marketed as a vitamin D supplement.
Let me get that straight. Are you saying that you would put the mushrooms in the sun and they would absorb the D3 from the sun?
Yeah, they have a metabolism process where they actually create it. So it's really interesting, and I'm seeing more and more companies actually, blend it into a powder and having like vitamin D enriched food that's vegan. It's from a sustainable source.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Where we focus on with mushroom revival is functional mushrooms. And so mushrooms like reishi, chaga, cordyceps for health and well-being, for our immune system, supporting our immune systems, our natural stress response from daily stress, energy levels. One of the things that gave my energy back with Lyme disease was this mushroom called cordyceps. And for people that don't know cordyceps, it's a crazy mushroom that actually grows on bugs in the wild. And you can look it up if you YouTube BBC Planet Earth cordyceps. You can see a little video of a mushroom popping out of an ant's head. And it's this weird sci-fi mushroom that grows on all these different insects all across the world. One in particular is Ophiocordyceps senescens that grows in Tibet. And this is worth its weight in gold. And it's hasn't really been figured out how to grow or cultivate it indoors. So people will climb to really high elevations in Tibet and try to find it in the grass. And it's really, really small. There's a cousin here in the US and all over the world called Cordyceps militaris. And it's this orange little Cheeto mushroom that grows on a moth larva. And it has a lot of the same compounds, such as cordycepin, adenosine, and like compounds, which actually work on our ATP production in our body, adenosine triphosphate, which is our food for our mitochondria. It's our natural energy source for our body. And so this really helped me get my energy back with my Lyme disease when I was bedridden, just sapped of energy. And then lion's mane, the notorious brain mushroom for nerve growth factor, reishi with a lot of triterpenes for, so many mushrooms out there for health and well-being. The next kind of stage of that is pharmaceuticals. And for the last 1,000 years or so, or last 100 years or so, we've been isolating a lot of compounds from fungi. Penicillin is a prime example, which has saved hundreds of millions of people's lives. Cyclosporin A, if you've had an organ transplant, you've probably been administered cyclosporin A from Tolipocladium inflatum. And this is a drug that helps actually suppress your immune system for your body to accept the organ and not reject it. There's a million types of drugs, like statin drugs, for example, are derived from fungi. PSK is a notorious drug that is used in cancer therapies in Japan. And so many others are derived from fungi, way more than you would expect. And in that kind of field of thought, fungi, yeasts are notorious in people's everyday lives. And I don't think people realize how often they consume yeast from our bread, wine, cheese, beer. There's a million things where yeast plays a huge role. And I've seen people eat a sandwich, drinking a beer, telling me they hate mushrooms, and
Yeah.
and it's funny, and we have, our own. A lot of people like to say, our gut is our second brain, our second immune system, and 90% of our serotonin is in our gut. We talk about our probiotics, our microbiome, but there's some prime researchers developing our understanding of our mycobiome and the amount of fungi that are benefiting our body. We have even up to 80 species of fungi in our mouths, and in our guts, there's so many. On our skin, there's so many types of fungi. And so really harnessing that and having a healthy microbiome and understanding of that will be crucial for years ahead. And fungal enzymes, so the metabolites, the secondary metabolites from fungi, are used in dozens of multi-billion-dollar industries, from agriculture to actually making jeans and making denim, leather, making drugs and digestive enzymes and and in micro remediation, using them to degrade toxic waste in our environment, toxins that no other organism or chemical can break down. So that's huge. For Superfund sites, we have an over accumulation of toxic waste on our planet, and it's up to us to break it down and clean up our waste. And along that note, some of the work that people like Merlin Sheldrick are doing is on mycorrhizal fungi or endophytic fungi, the fungi in relationship with plants. And we wouldn't have plants if it wasn't for fungi. And so understanding that so we can help our agricultural businesses and our forests become healthier and become less reliant on chemical, herbicides or insecticides or fertilizers, and we can naturally build back our soil, store carbon in the soil, and regain a healthy ecosystem. And another part of that, similar to cordyceps, they're in a genus called entomopathogenic fungi, which are just fungi that attack insects, basically. And you can think of all the pests that are damaging to agricultural plants. And if we can use a fungi instead of a chemical to help control these insect pests, that can be huge for our environment. And also other insects like malaria-carrying mosquitoes. I know a researcher working to help attack those specifically mosquitoes carrying malaria without using toxic chemicals, or ticks carrying Lyme disease. And so helping the spread of these diseases is fundamental for our evolution and our safety as an organism, as a species moving forward. As we saw with coronavirus, something biological or a disease can wipe out massive amounts of our population. And to partner with fungi and other natural systems to be able to counteract that is extremely fundamental. Our exploration for space. There's a lot of researchers using melanized fungi that were discovered in Chernobyl, actually, in super toxic radioactive spaces. They found fungi thriving and eating only the radiation in these spaces. And so they found, wow, why don't we use these in space on the International Space Station? And if we're going to go to Mars and other spaces, to protect astronauts from the harmful UV radiation in space. And even on Earth, as our ozone layer is deteriorating, making new sunscreens that are infused with these melanized fungi that are more natural than the sunscreens that we have today. These are just the tip of the icebergs of what fungi can do. And I think because they're so universal and can touch every aspect of our lives, it's fundamental that we protect biodiversity of our ecosystems. We have discovered a mere maybe 2.4% of known species of fungi. And that's just an estimate. We just had a researcher come on our show talking about marine fungi. And I think if we include the fungi in the oceans, I think it's a 0.00001% that we've discovered, because we've only discovered 5% of life in oceans, or the oceans in general. And we're finding fungi in deep, deep ocean beds, and they are extremophiles. And what's interesting is they carry these metabolites and these compounds that can revolutionize every single industry that you can think of. and
Well, I
do it
think
in
this is a good word to use, and if you don't mind my cutting in for a moment, because I can tell that you could go on for hours on this because you are a walking encyclopedia of knowledge on these issues, and so I just want to pick up on that word that you just used and confirm or agree with you that I think it's very exciting. We're potentially on the cusp of a revolution here that's central to the sustainability of life in the future, and it's also embedded within a larger or overarching kind of cosmological understanding that we are in relationship to everything. And this is, I think, if I may say so, the key to a sustainable, sane future on this planet. That we need to recognize that we're embedded within these incredible intelligent processes and plants and so on and so on and so on. Rather than as you say, that's you've just given us a kind of a trailer to the immense possibilities of these, and so rather than go on and on about it, what I'd like to ask you at this point is to direct people to other sources where they can learn more about those that want to, and we can kind of wrap it up. Do you have any particular links, sources, or anything you want to share that I can put little titles, underneath this when I do the post on it?
Sure. We actually, I co-host a mushroom-centered podcast called the Mushroom Revival Podcast, where we have a different expert every week come on and dive super deep on probably a lot of the topics that I touched upon today. And we have a video component as well. Merlin Sheldrake's book is a great start for people who like books. The Entangled Life. Mycelium Running by Paul Stamets is also a great introductory book for people that want an introduction to the space of what mushrooms are and what they can do to help the planet. Apart from that, if you have access to psilocybin mushrooms, just meeting them firsthand, and I'm sure you'll get an extraordinary experience of mushrooms that you can't read on the internet or in a book or listen to on a podcast or watch in a video. It's real firsthand experience with mushrooms.
I'd like to remind people of what you said at the beginning, which I supported and agreed with as well, is that it's not about. Although I mean, what the hey, if you want colors and excitement, then who's to say not? You can't do that, obviously, but that's just the sort of first level, so to speak. For example, I have a friend who's an ayahuasquera. She's been leading ayahuasca ceremonies for a long time. She's really sincere, really, studied it deeply, and so on and so on. And she's a very mystical kind of person. And she says, with ayahuasca, the visual stuff, that's just sort of like the ante room. What the real teachings are, what's in behind that. Once you get through that, and then you encounter, intelligence, you encounter, educating spirit, and so on and so on. So I just would like to encourage anyone who's watching this or listening to it that as again, who's to say you can't have a sort of sensational experience, but the real value of this, and it's obviously not just for oneself, it's for all of us, which that's another key issue, is that we all need to be joining together now to save this planet. We're past the flatland times on this planet. We are into the time when we need to roll up our sleeves as a group, as a species, and recognize that we have immense capabilities to change things, and that has to happen now. And so when people that haven't experimented yet with mushrooms do so, I would just like to encourage people, again, within a fairly wide playing field, to think about the fact that they can change your mind, they can dissolve your known, they can dissolve your ego. So be careful of the conditions that you take those in, and especially if you're a particularly inward or sensitive kind of person, it can be very helpful to have a guide or a reliable ceremonial context or that kind of thing. So any other sources that you'd like people to tune into? We mentioned your book at the beginning. What's it called again?
My book is Micromediation Handbook, and we had it for free. We just did a website change, so we're trying to put it back up, and you can get the free PDF, which you can read. It's a little outdated. I'm working on another book on functional mushrooms in particular. But you said it actually in what you just said, How to Change Your Mind. And I think that's an amazing book by Michael Pollan that he
Mm.
just released for people that are a little skeptical, maybe haven't worked with psilocybin mushrooms, and or maybe it's a good gift for a family member who's a little skeptical. I think he does a really beautiful job at
Hmm.
making it really accessible and safe and friendly to the average person.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree with that. When I read that book right away, I thought this is a game changer, this book, because of exactly what you said. He just paints himself as kind of the everyman. Like, I don't know much about these things either, folks. And, I had an ego dissolving experience. You too could do that, was the implication there. Yeah. So, Alex, I think this is a good time to round it up, unless there's something that you feel like we've badly missed and just has to be said here. Of course, we could always do another one, in 6 months or a year anyway, because I'm really impressed with your knowledge and you have an amazing memory for the names and the details of all these things. So you're a wonderful resource and you're engaged in some fantastic work as far as I'm concerned. As I said earlier, revolutionary. And so thanks a lot for sharing all that stuff. And yeah, well, let's keep in touch. And that's it. Stick around a little bit after I hit the record off, will you? And we'll just
Sure.
tie up that way. So again, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me on.